Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
I'm back. I'm Nick.
And I'm Ron, not to be confused with Batman over there.
This is our review of Paranormal Activity, starring Katie Featherston and Mika Sloat. Directed by Oren Peli, made in 2007 for $15,000, released wide in 2009 with a little help from Steven Spielberg. This film grossed over $193 million worldwide. You know, they say, guys, that New Line Cinema is the house that Freddie built. Blumhouse Productions, the home of Insidious, The Conjuring, Annabelle, Sinister, so many other things, even some TV shows. Well, Paranormal Activity is the house that built that. Now, Ron, you and I have seen these before. Nick, you're new to this, and I drug you in here because of the Blair Witch tie-in that we'll get to in a minute. But, Ron, I wanted to kind of start with you, your introduction to Paranormal Activity. How'd you find out about it? When did you first see it?
Well, I have my wife to thank for that. I had seen the commercials for it. I had actually ended up coming to my town. I had either skipped it or forgotten about it. And then before she was my wife, she made me buy the DVD, and we watched it on my dingy non-HD television, and immediately sucked right in to this whole universe.
Yeah, I've never seen any of these in the theater, oddly enough. I caught on to this as a rental because I had heard all the buzz about it. Ended up renting it one night. Me and the wife both loved it. And subsequently, we watched the rest of them at home because unlike a lot of films that I think, you really need to see that in the theater to get the experience, I will actually argue Paranormal Activity is better when you watch it home alone.
I would argue differently because I watched the first one at home, and then I saw the rest of them in the movie theaters. And if you can get like the afternoon teenager showing or go to the ghetto movie theater, it's a phenomenal, awesomely fun experience.
Well, maybe for the experience, but I think if you're trying to watch the movie and pay attention to any of it, it might be better to do so at home. But Nick, as I said in the intro there, you're new to all of this whole series, but I wanted you in on it, one, because you're the newbie to it, but also you and I did the Blair Witch thing, and these are found footage movies, and we talked about how that first one, in spite of its flaws, and it's got some, it held up, and we both liked it. That second one was a complete disaster, and we both tore it apart for it. So I wanted to get you in on this, too, but tell me and everybody else here, how did you avoid Paranormal Activity, or were you just not in a horror phase in 2009?
I really wasn't in a horror phase at 2009. I really haven't searched out any new horror movies. A lot of the new stuff that's come out over the years, I've not really enjoyed. I think it's, a lot of it's pretty hokey or, too reliant on CGI where it really takes you out of the moment. I think kind of like, a good example would be like the new Nightmare on Elm Street or the new Jason movie. I know those are all like remakes and stuff like that, but even like original ones like, I think of like Saw, those ones really wore out on me real quick. And, that was the whole phase. And it kind of seemed like it went from like torture porn to this found footage, genre, and I just kind of avoided it because I was so burned out on the torture porn that I was like, forget it. I'll stick to my movies. My go-tos are always like Poltergeist, just the 80s flair. A lot of cheesy 80s movies too, which, me and you have reviewed that I've always enjoyed.
Yeah.
The schlocky 80s. I think those are always my kind of go-to horror movies. And even like stuff like The Lost Boys and everything, I've always liked those. But just, I knew these came out. I knew that there was a fan base behind it. I remember when this one came out, and I think the reason I didn't see it is my uncle, he's a real big movie buff. He films, and I think it was like Christmas right when this came out or after this came out. I asked him, I'm like, oh, you hear about that Paranormal Activity movie? And he's like, oh, yeah, I've heard about that for a while. And he goes, yeah, it's a piece of shit. So I was just like, oh, okay. And I just him saying that, not that it's like, oh, he's Jesus to me or something where I need to like follow everything that he says, but I think that was just all I needed to hear to kind of stay away from it. And I don't know, just a lot of this found footage stuff. I mean, anytime I think of found footage, I'm thinking of like Alien Sure you remember that.
Yeah.
Like those are all kind of, I think, then the basis of found footage was when they did like those like faux documentaries, and I don't know, just kind of low budget fare. I don't know, I was more into, I don't even know what I was into when this came out. I don't know, acid. I don't know.
Well, no, I can understand why you would skip it. You mentioned a movie there in that mix of things, Poltergeist. I think a lot of these movies, particularly these haunting movies, owe a lot to that film. And Ron, we talked about that briefly when we did Annabelle, that there's, Blumhouse certainly does a lot of those things. I happen to be a fan of a lot of Blumhouse stuff. And Paranormal Activity for me, though, kind of ranks below it. It wasn't a series I ever thought I'd want to review, but the more I've rewatched these and got into them, there's something to be said about found footage movies. Once you know the whole story, it's, do I want to sit through that again? And the one thing that this one, and I will say this series as a whole, just to telegraph some of my comments for future shows, it gets right, is that they don't shaky cam you to death. Like, I think that's part of the found footage genre that gets me. Like, I like the story behind Cloverfield, the movie, but there's about 30 minutes of that it really makes me like vomit to watch. And I don't
Cloverfield, forgot about that movie.
I don't get motion sickness or anything like that much, but that one gives me a huge headache because it's just so, I don't know, just rattling to sit through and watch. And Blair Witch can do that to you as well. These films, I don't think, do that as much. They go with the conceit of the found footage, but one thing I will say about this series that's fun to me is always the conceit that they come up with as to why you're watching found footage. I always, Blair Witch, this is all we found of them. And I remember when this one came out and, you see the opening thing, it's like, we'd like to thank the families of these people and the San Diego County, Police Department for their participation in this. So they tried to pitch this as if this was for real, but I think people are just wise to that now. They don't even play with that anymore.
Can't do that.
Yeah, not in the internet age. I just don't think that works.
Yeah, exactly. All you got to do is just look up the person's name on there and see their IMDb profile, or they're still alive. That's not real. So you really can't, have that conceit anymore. And I think even like, speaking of found footage, totally forgot about Cloverfield, and I think there was even that Fourth Kind piece of shit that came out with Mila Jovovich, and I did see those, and that was always kind of a thing that you brought up about the achy it was, and just kind of like it does make you kind of nauseated. It feels just kind of like a bad, like if you ever go to like a Mall of America or any type of big mall, how they got those like those rides you go into, those like
centrifuge rides and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like Star Tours at Disney World, and things like that always make me sick. It's like I get motion sickness pretty easy. So I think that was also kind of the reason I stayed away from it. And plus, there was always the conceit about these people going do horrific things and yet they keep on filming. Yeah, I mean, like in the Blair Witch where, all this shit's going on and yet they're still filming. And it's like, put the damn camera down, dude. Just.
Yeah.
We'll get those problems with this movie, but I think, we'll get into it, but I think this one was a little bit more well done.
Yeah.
Oren Peli is a phenomenal, story to me. Just basically how he shot this movie in 7 days. He edited it as they shot it. He entered it into one horror movie film festival, got noticed by somebody at CAA, who passed it on to Jason Blum, who then CAA sent it out to basically everyone in Hollywood, including, as the aforementioned, Steven Spielberg and the DreamWorks folks and Paramount Pictures. And instead of letting them take his movie and remake it with Hollywood actors, he told them to do a test screening and see how it played. Huh. So they did a test screening. They saw people getting up and leaving the test screening, but they weren't walking out because they were bored. They were walking out because they couldn't handle it.
Yeah, that's always a good sign.
Yeah, basically they just wanted to get a hold of it and do it a different way with him directing. Mm-hmm. But because he was insistent and he stuck to his guns and he had Jason Blum behind him, he got to actually become a real Hollywood thing.
I mean, yeah, it's the most successful independent film of all time now, right? This has passed Halloween and any of the others that were on that list. Blair Witch had passed Halloween at this point, but I think this beat Blair Witch because it was cheaper and made more money. That's the thing about horror movies that gets me. I grew up in the 80s and and watching horror movies and like your slasher films. I mean, they'd make them for $4 or $5 million, and they'd make 15, maybe 20. And that was considered a huge success. I mean, I think the first 3 or 4 Friday the 13th each cost $1 million or less to make, and they all made, $20 million. So, I mean, that kind of bank has always been what horror is for. But then horror movies went through a lot of different turns. I mean, you had things like Saw and Hostel, like you mentioned, Nick, and then you had stuff like, all the J horror that got remade in America, The Grudge and The Ring and The Ring 2, and you talk about a bad sequel, by the way, and all that kind of stuff. And there's a really terrible one with Joshua Jackson called Shudder, by the way. I don't recommend anyone watch that, but if you're on watching the Sci-Fi Network late at night and you got nothing better to do, there's an hour and a half of your life to throw away on him. But
if you are a J horror fan, feel free to Japanese 32.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
and then tell us how it is.
The Japanese versions generally are far superior to the American counterparts, but you had that movement. And then, I don't know, horror has always been in this doldrum where maybe there was something good happening, maybe there wasn't. But to have something come out like this, and where every installment is this massive blockbuster hit, but they are made so incredibly cheap. It's rare to find a horror series that maintains that level. Is what I'm getting around to saying. I mean, these movies are blockbusters, and partially because they're released usually at a time when they can really mop up and clean up, and I think part because they've got something to say and they're pretty good. So it can be fun. It's rare to find a horror series that maintains that kind of momentum. Is the thing, though. They generally start to fall apart, 2 or 3 episodes in. So be curious to see once we get into some of these how that maintains. But before we get any further, I guess, Ron, you need to give us a plot summary. Tell us what Paranormal Activity is all about.
Sure thing. Katie and Mika, not Micah, a young couple, move into a new house in sunny San Diego, California, but not all is sunny behind closed doors for those two. Katie is being haunted by an evil presence, and Mika helpfully sets up a camera to catch any and all activity that occurs while they sleep, and possibly to film some sex tapes without Katie paying attention. Mika, being the skeptic, doesn't take this seriously, even as the camera continues to catch strange events during the night. Unexplained noises, flickering lights, moving doors, demonic screeching, and Katie, in a trance state, standing by the bed for hours, not moving, just staring and breathing. Even when Mika's Ouija board catches fire, he refuses to call the demonologist in for help. Thought to be lost in a house fire. Things only get weirder. Demons drag Katie down a hallway, leave mysterious bite marks on her back, and generally behave menacingly. Fed up, Mika tells Katie that they're staying in a hotel, and surprisingly, Katie snaps back to normal. The next night, Katie again does her statue impression for a few hours while Mika sleeps. Then she goes downstairs. A screaming human, a screaming demon, rushing footsteps, and a dead body is violently hurled at the camera. In the doorway is Katie, who crawls to the camera, grins, and gives us one last good jump scare before we cut to black and are rewarded with more faux reality text.
Guys, let's talk about the whole found footage thing. And we've all seen found footage movies. What makes this one different than some of the other ones you've seen? Ron?
Even though they're basically improving the whole movie, they seem to have a pretty good chemistry with one another. And I like that it avoids most of the perils of the found footage, like you mentioned, the grabbing the camera and running around with it.
Yeah. Nick, what about you?
Well, I think it kind of starts off pretty good with, he buys this new camera and basically he's just kind of screwing around with it. I mean, he bought it for the obvious reasons, which are brought up in the plot summary. But, in the whole beginning of it, it's, he's just kind of screwing around with it, just kind of being the typical boyfriend with it. And I kind of, the whole reason for buying it too. I mean, I think it's, it's a logical reason where, his girlfriend's, she's having these type of, experiences at night and they want to see kind of what's going on, probably just for him just to kind of show nothing's going on so he can kind of throw it back in her face a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I guess just nowadays, I mean, it is kind of weird actually seeing someone with a camcorder.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big, heavy duty camera. He's got a nice one.
Does anybody buy? I mean, that was the thing too.
Yeah.
That was a big one. I mean, that was like something you probably see out of the 80s or something you see in a movie set nowadays. But
Well, she comments on this, and I actually am going to say that the thing that makes this different is how much of a part of the characters that it is. It's like the Blair Witch. The reason they had cameras was they were a film crew, so it made sense for them to have all that equipment around. Mika, as we find out, is a day trader, which means he works at home and makes a few trades a day, and then he basically screws around the rest of the day. I mean, that's not what all day traders do. That's what he does. Okay, and that's what we're kind of led to believe he does. Katie's still in college trying to, what is she, an English major with a Spanish minor or something like she's going to teach? I don't know. They're just trying to figure out what
she's going to be paying off those student loans for the rest of her life.
Or maybe Mika's already done that. I don't know. He seems to be pretty well. But she mentions in, just dropped lines here and there, and you can kind of see it around their house. He has a strange fascination with electronics. Like he's got an electric guitar, he's got amps, he's got phones, he's always playing with something. And in 2007, and we got to remember this movie came out in 2009. We watched it in 2015. Our lives are so electronic now, but in 2007, that hadn't completely taken over the way that it is now. And you can see that in their life. They have a very modern house in San Diego, and I like the fact that he bought this as two reasons. One, because he wants to see what his girlfriend's freaking out about, but two, because he really wanted a badass camera. And I mean, I think the first thing she says about it is, what happened to the little handy cam thing? And he's got this, professional production camera that he's holding up in front of her.
I'm sure you guys are the same way. It's like you go right to the TVs. You're looking at the biggest and the newest TV there, and you're kind of like, oh, it'd be nice to get. Then I think he's just that type of guy where it's, he's still kind of, in this bachelor stage where he's got a lot of this disposable income. They're dinks, dual income, no kids. And, he just wants to have some fun with his money. And I could totally see someone like him, just kind of over investing in something, something he's probably going to use probably for the next, prove to her that nothing's going on, and then probably just, end up in the back of the closet until they get married or some shit.
Right. I think he says something to the effect of like, we're engaged to be engaged. And she kind of gives him this look, but they're still together in the same house. But I will say this, though. This is the other thing.
And he's kind of a douche. I mean, he's kind of your typical California douche, too.
I guess so. But I want to say this, though, besides the fact that he says his name all wrong, because I would call that Micah all the way. Matter of fact, I thought
Micah's a girl name.
It's just a different way of doing it. But whatever. I will say that the one of the things that really works about this film is the fact that these two are good at playing off of one another as if they've been a couple for 3 or 4 years like they're supposed to have been. I think they it's not only just chemistry, like they are good at bantering with one another.
I totally buy the relationship. I mean, they do seem like they've been together for a while. They're obviously comfortable with each other, and I think it really shows between them that, that they have a pretty good comfort level with each other, as opposed to, some movies you see and, kind of like, you have two couples and it's like, they would totally not be together. They're very frigid when talking to each other, but they came off very natural.
I also think you could tell that they were comfortable with one another because he tries to stick the camera into the bathroom with her.
Yeah.
Which is a great use for a $15,000 camera.
I love how she's continuing screaming at him about it too. Like, okay, you can go now. But of course, as every dude that has a camera thinks, it's like, I know what we can use this camera for. And the girl's immediately like, yeah, you'd think that. But, so, that does set up a lot of some cool character moments for them. And I think that's, the first 10 or 15 minutes of this are just them kind of screwing around the house. Like there's nothing happens. Like there's nothing going on. You wonder why this movie's called Paranormal Activity, because there's nothing paranormal about it until later on.
It is the setup, though. You watch any found footage film, Cloverfield, you got the whole party scene in the beginning.
Yep.
Blair Witch, you got them kind of screwing around, going to talking to, all of a sudden just have it set up right in the bedroom and recording, what's going on. You got to get to know the characters a little bit, even though it's, trying to be like a faux documentary, found footage. You still got to go through the whole story, of your, introduce the characters, get to know them a little bit, because if you're seeing people that are, you don't know or don't really have any type of connection to, chances that they'll go through later, have a connection to them, the film's not going to work.
Well, I think that's just it, is so many of these films just throw you into the stuff so quick that you don't really have time to invest in anyone. And it's pretty clear that it's going to be Katie and Mika the whole time. And we're basically in the house the whole movie. So, I mean, it's in one house. They actually shot this in a real house, right?
Yes, they did.
Mm-hmm. And
it actually went up for sale earlier this year.
Oh, wow. I bet it fetches a pretty penny, just because it's in San Diego. So more than anything.
Yeah, it's a 1,300 square foot house, and it's probably going for like $800,000 in San Diego.
Yeah, easily. So yeah, for sure.
I actually looked at the real estate listing. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, swimming pool, $765,000 or so.
Wow, pretty good. You almost had it, but you went over, so you don't get to play the next pricing game there, Nick. But nice try. We have some party.
Yeah, but you got to add in the HOA fees, so I even out.
Yeah, this is true.
I think it ended up going for over $1 million though. The 765 was just the list price.
I can believe it, but it's a cute. But even though that sounds very spacious. Like I don't live in a house that big. You know, that sounds like a lot of room to me. And I haven't lived in a place that big ever in my life. So that sounds huge. But the one thing this film does, and I think every good horror film has to do this, is there's some sense of confinement. Even the Blair Witch Project, they were in the woods, but there was confinement because they were lost. They essentially walked in circles for 3 or 4 days. And I think that's what this movie does a good job of, is keeping us in this house, and it's got these big ceilings, and there's none of these small rooms or anything, but it feels so confined. And I like that. And I know it's a product of the budget and some of that other, but that's one thing about this film that I think works. They work the space well, and Oren Peli's good at it. Now, did I read this right? Was Mika Sloat like an actual cameraman at one time in his life?
Yes, he was a cameraman for his college television station, which is probably why he's the guy who runs the camera the entire time. I
was going to ask, does he actually shoot this film, or is it just him standing by whoever's doing it?
No, he's holding the camera.
Oh, that's pretty cool, because that's one of the things about Cloverfield. The actor that is behind that camera ends up shooting about 2/3 of that film. Like you
mean T.J. Miller?
Is that T.J. Miller? I never put that together, but he's Hutch? Wow.
Yeah.
Or HUD? Oh, wow. That's good to know. But yeah, he ended up shooting a lot of that, and that's cool to know, though, that he shot a lot of this. And so I'll say again, though, the smart thing they do here is there's not a lot of the jerky movement or running around. And when he starts to drop the camera and point it to the ground so he can talk or whatever to her, it shuts off. And I love how it'll just shut off in the middle of things, and we pick up at other things, and it just sort of transitions from place to place.
I think that's the benefit to having the nice camera stability.
Yeah.
Control.
Good point. So, guys, let's talk about the activity in Paranormal Activity, if you will. I mean, that's a lot of it is just, noise and sounds, and, do you see that over there? What? Over where? And people reacting to things that aren't there. And I give a lot of credit to our 2 actors here who were amateur actors at this point. They weren't professionals. I mean, they were trying to break in and get SAG cards. That's why they took this job. But they didn't have any experience doing something like that. And I dare say they pull that off pretty good. I mean, I've seen that done badly. Go watch the Star Wars prequels. Ewan McGregor struggles for 3 films looking at things that aren't there, and that's not his fault. And I don't blame him.
Just go watch Ghost Hunters.
I like that they're able to sell us on the activity a lot of times it's just footsteps and noises.
I think it helps that it's really subtle stuff, too. Like, for me, the thing that pushes strange believability the most is their one expensive shot where they set that Ouija board on fire.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly that's the most expensive shot in the movie because they had to burn a $15 board.
Yeah.
And somebody had to buy one of those little portable fire extinguishers.
They probably just borrowed it from whoever had that house. So, I mean, let's be honest. So,
yeah.
It's probably fire code that you have to have that. So.
But it works because the movie doesn't rush right into things. It spends so much time building up to these really subtle things that when something actually happens, it's like setting a dry wood on fire. And it kind of, if you've ever tried to light a fire, it will kind of smolder for a while and flare up and maybe die back down if you're terrible at lighting fires like I am. Enough things happen so that you start to pay more attention and look for things that aren't there.
I think that's one of the factors about this that really works, and it's one of those reasons I said watching this at home may be better experience, because you can spend time rewatching it and looking in the background. and looking for what's not there and stuff. The funny thing about this one is that I was going to tell you folks, there's nothing there. This was shot for $15,000 and 5 of that was on post-production. So this was shot for $10,000. There wasn't anything there. It's so unnerving. And I think part of that is that there's no score to this at all. No music, nothing. That's a bold choice too, because, I famously retold the story that John Carpenter tells, that he, showed a cut of Halloween to an executive without the score on it, and she's like, "This is the most boring movie I've ever seen in my life. These people are just standing around popping popcorn," and then he put the score over it and scared the crap out of her. To have a horror movie that can invoke creepiness and unnerving without a score is a real feat.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with just the whole, when the camera's shooting at night, just the way that's shot and the way it looks.
Yeah.
It's very just, kind of creepy in a way, and it's playing off your expectations. This movie does have the classic slow, but it's always, you have a camera just sitting there. You watch any movie, whether it's, $250 million movie or, $10,000 movie, is that normally you got a long shot. Mm-hmm. You're expecting something to happen. And that's what it plays with on every time it's in the bedroom, is it just sits there, and it just is very, very, the first time it's happening, really nothing, happens. But then each time, each scene that occurs in, you're getting just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And it's, like I said, it's a slow burn. It's teasing the audience. And I think that's why it works very well, is just when you mix in that slow burn, the audience expectations, and then just how it looks, it really does give a creepy factor to it.
Exactly. I mean, both the actors have talked about in a lot of the supplemental material and in interviews and things, is that they were so proud that this is practical effects, except for the end shot with the face change for Katie there. This is all practical effects, and they say Oren is one of those guys that just works magic. He can just work movie magic with fishing line and stuff, shutting doors and all those kind of things. And one of the best things to me is when they drag Katie down the hall. I mean, that is, I still don't know how they pulled that off, but it looks great now. That is a really cool scene. And she reacts the way someone being drugged out of their bed, out of a dead sleep, would react. That was really well done.
One of the things that's the best is when they fast forward through, like, Katie standing at the bedside.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see how still she is. She's moving very little, but he's tossing and turning, and it just makes it even creepier because her movements are so subtle. It looks like she's actually standing there for 2 hours.
Yeah, oh yeah, and that's all the little timer trick in the bottom, but still, they had to shoot, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of footage. It's hard to stand still and just stare at somebody for 5 minutes and not, shift your weight, move your feet, whatever. She does a great job of it. I give a lot of credit to Katie because she has to sell the scares. Mika has to do a lot of dialogue when he's not on screen, so his voice does a lot of his work. But she has to sell the haunting, because what we're watching essentially is that, and what we learn through the interactions with the psychic and some other things, is that even if they leave, it would go with her, which I'm like, oh, that's the idea for Insidious right there. I'd never caught that before, but there it is. And I love that we're watching someone become haunted and essentially fall apart in front of us. And she does a good job of selling that, and just really, I mean, near the end there, before she goes completely evil and kills him, she looks rough. And, that's with no real makeup artists or effect. That's just her, not combing her hair, one day and all in her eyes. And the stunts of her standing up, though, by the bed are creepy for sure.
Yeah. Well, we're married. We know what it's like waking up when they're not wearing makeup. So, but to get, but to kind of delve a little bit more into the movie and the plot aspect of it, I think, even just in the beginning of the movie, you bring in this third character there. You bring in this paranormal investigator.
Right.
This guy who comes into the house, and of course he's the Tangia of the movie, from Poltergeist, and he seems to have all the answers. I think it was a little bit convenient, right away. He's like, oh, this is a demon. This is a demon and everything, and but it did kind of add a little bit of a creepy factor into there because very seldom, I mean, you just watch these ghost movies, they don't ever label it like a demon. It's always, an entity or a poltergeist or something like that. So it kind of was a little bit intriguing. Now, when, this is my first time watching it, so I decided to wait until about 11:30 at night, and I watched it in my bedroom so to get the full effect. And, I think really that really added a lot more to the, experience. I don't think if you watch this on like a Saturday at 2:00 in the afternoon, it's going to really work as well as, watching it in the pitch dark in your bedroom. I think that's kind of the perfect thing. Back to what you're saying, Jay, not better at home. And I totally believe that. But the things, though, I'm going to stop complimenting the movie. I don't want to sit there and just, talk about how great it is, because this movie does have problems.
Oh, yeah.
One of the, the problems that I had in there was, going back to that paranormal investigator, how he had all the answers and, completely useless guy. He didn't help them out at all. And I think he actually made it worse because you get kind of about, 2/3 of the way in and shit's really hitting the fan. And they call this guy back in and he's like, well, I don't even want to be here. I'm just making it for everybody.
That's one of the things I was going to say. That's one of the things that really worked for me is he walks in the house. He's like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. Bye. And then he flees.
Yeah. Like he doesn't just leave. Like he runs.
Coward, though.
No, but I like that, though, because I'm with you, Nick. When we first meet him, this guy annoyed the piss out of me because I'm like, well, if you know so dang much, why don't you do something and go to the further and, tell him to leave her alone or whatever. I'm using forward knowledge for that, but I'm like, come on, man, you can't do any better than that. But when he comes back in, that's when he sells it because he's scared out of his mind. I like that. I thought that was really well done.
To me, though, he totally seems like he's full of shit when he gets in there the first time. And then he comes back and he's got like this like premonition, or you can feel it. He just like this, like that show Ghost Hunters. He's just some guy who's full of shit. And maybe like something happens with him or something that actually scares the shit out of him and he gets out of the house. I didn't like it though when he told him it's like, well, you can't leave. It's just going to follow you. I'd be like, well, shit, I'm still leaving. Let this thing follow me. I'm driving. I'm getting the hell out of here. And that was my big issue with the movie was they don't leave.
Yeah.
And when she's sitting there and she's like literally looks like she's ready to. It looks like she is severely ill.
Mm-hmm.
And the boyfriend, what a freaking idiot. He doesn't even do anything about it. It's like, oh, let's just go back to bed. They had all this shit happen to him. Between finding the picture in the attic, which was a really good scene. And all this other stuff, it's like, get out of there. Get out of there. It's like, get out of Dodge. They didn't set it up at all like, oh, these people don't have a family. They got no other place to go. Or, maybe it would have been better if it would have, not been in douchey San Diego. Sorry.
Yeah, so let's step back just a second, though, because you mentioned we kind of glossed over some of the activity. I want to talk about those two big things. We talked about Katie standing up beside the bed and getting drug out of the bed. Mika is the one that's like they have different ways of wanting to deal with this. She wants to call the demonologist. Yeah, she wants to do the demonologist and all that, and he wants to run all these little tests. Like he sets up the talcum powder in the floor, and then they catch footprints. And then he hears something in the attic and he goes up there to check it out and he sees that picture of her that's burnt on four corners and then she gets bit. And I mean, that is some freaky stuff. It takes forever for this guy to get mad enough to say, screw it, we're leaving. Like to me, I would have left a lot sooner, but part of me thinks that's supposed to tell us who he is. He feels like he can just fix it if he just spends enough time on it and it's pissing him off that he can't fix it.
But he's not doing anything, though. I mean, what does he do? He Googles a story online and finds some lady that had the same thing that happened, and she died. So his solution is, let's keep on doing the same stuff over again, and it's going to get better. I mean, that's a definition of insanity. But he doesn't come off like he's insane. He just comes off like he's a but biggest douchebags get the hell out of there, at least for themselves. I'd be like, all right, girl, see you later. I'm out of here. But that never crosses their mind until like the very, very end. And that was just kind of driving me crazy. It was like, there's freaking footprints in the talcum powder and you guys are not getting in your car and leaving. Mm-hmm. What the hell is wrong with you? Even if it's not a ghost, there's somebody in your house. There might be somebody there. There might be a little midget dressed as a freaking, bunny rabbit in her freaking stuffed animal collection. That's when, the conceit really kind of wore off on me. It's like, okay, I'll take the camera. I'll take them doing this. Okay, it's set up really well. It has some sense to it. But when all this other shit's happening, when she gets bit, and they just don't leave the house, I can't give the movie that. To me, it just then it started feeling full.
This place is going to have to burn down around me before I leave it. Because I've sunk my savings into this place. And even though I don't have day trader money, I'm going to stick it out through every possible infestation, be it demon or cockroach.
What you think, though, when you see the footprints in there, call the cops. You know what I mean? I mean, at that point, they really don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're like, they think it's a ghost, but logic would say, okay, there's something going on here. Maybe we need to kind of step up and get some other people involved here, whether it's calling the police or doing something besides just doing the same damn stuff. And it's not like they're changing anything. They're just doing the same damn stuff again.
Well, they do try to contact the demonologist, but he's out of town.
Right. Nick, I see what you're saying, and I think it's valid criticism. I'm going to tell you why it didn't bother me, and it's never bothered me about this. And it goes back to our two actors, because while that all is going down, those two are at each other's throats, and not in like a fake Hollywood coupley kind of way. Like, they're having real people fights, and I like it when Katie's very much the sweet one and kind and stuff, and she's got a pretty long fuse for Mika and stuff, and he seems to be a little more of the hothead. But when she gets mad, it. Like, she is pissed. Like, every other word is F and F you, and just like she's just pissed. And then she just breaks down and starts bawling, and he runs in there to, be with her, and they make up, and they talk through it. It's the couple moments that get me through the times when this movie is kind of slow, because there's a lot of time when nothing is happening. And you're like, come on, do something. Get out of the house. Call the cops. If it were left to lesser performances, I would feel the same way. But because I get invested in our characters and in the actors, I don't feel that way. I'm on board with it, and I feel for them. I really do. And just like Ron said, too, they're young and they got money, but this is their house, damn it. And especially the way Mika is about his stuff. He's like, I ain't leaving this. This is my house, man. No way. I always keep saying, you come in my house and F with my girlfriend. And he keeps saying all that like he's some big badass. And I'm like, please, this guy'd blow over in the wind. But he's doing that man thing, that macho shit. And I liked it. I thought it was cute, and it gave a realness again to that relationship that got me through the slow parts of it.
Jay, if your wife got dragged out of her bed by some type of invisible entity and got bit on the side, are you telling me you guys are going to spend another night there, or are you guys going up to freaking Tennessee to get with go stay at some relatives' house?
No.
Be honest. What are you doing?
No, we'd be going to see relatives. But the thing that has been set up here, and we haven't said it, we don't know anything about Mika's family at all, and we don't know that Katie has any family. Now, we'll learn a lot about that in subsequent sequels, but we don't know that in this movie. So, like Ron said, we don't know what these people's lives are, and even if they have family, maybe they're far away from them, they can't get to them easy, and they're also
just drop a line. That's all they got to do is just drop a line. It could be that she's sitting there going, I want to go, and he could just be a total douchebag and go, fine, you can leave, but I'm staying here.
They do mention her mother in a negative way.
Right.
And they do mention her sister, but they don't say where her sister is or where her sister is located. They just mention that she has or had a sister.
Right. Like, you don't get the sense that Katie comes from a great, home background, because she talks about, look, I had some weird stuff like this happen when I was younger. It's not funny. I know you think it's cute, but it's not, and I don't want to I don't want to play around with this stuff. And whereas Mika's more of the, he's wanting to figure it out and just, explain it away. He's the skeptic in every possible way. And, we know nothing about his family at all, except that they get a credit, a faux credit in the beginning. So I took it as much. In the real world, yes, I'm with you, Nick. I myself would get up and leave, go somewhere else or whatever. But even they come to that at the end. They're like, let's go to the hotel. F this, let's go. And then that's when she turns, and that's when the movie gets strange. Because it's like, wait a minute, what? And she says something about, we'll be all right here. And the way she says it doesn't make me think she's including him in that we. It's all in her eyes. But I every time I've watched this, I'm like, oh, she's possessed. And I think that's what we're supposed to believe happens, right?
Yeah. But, just, back to the whole thing with the hostel. I mean, that's what I'm saying. If it wasn't set in wasn't set in California, or maybe it's in the winter, and leaving's not feasible. This bad snowstorm, something like that, where it's just not feasible. Or, Yeah, or maybe it's like in a remote area where, they're out in like some rural area or something, and it's like we got an hour and a half drive to get to anybody, or a 2 hour drive, or something like that, or even being like my situation where the nearest family member's 14 hours away. I mean,
Right.
just maybe just a change of scenery, or just just some type of explanation as to why. Because to me, it's just like the whole discussion of them leaving was probably like 3 scenes too late for me.
Let's keep in mind we're dealing with a guy who a psychic walks in your house and tells you there's a demon. Your girlfriend has dealt with this kind of thing before and says it's not a joke. And you go out and buy a Ouija board.
Yeah.
He said he didn't buy it, though. He just borrowed it.
That's a lie. That's it. Wait till the statement comes in at the end of the month. That's bullshit.
Who's going to loan you such a nice Ouija board?
He went to Spencer's and bought that. So, come on.
That's like the Brookstone of Ouija boards.
I mean, yeah, that's a nice Ouija board. That gets totally trashed, by the way. But anyway, not that I would know a lot about Ouija boards. So
it's the Lynn Shay signature model.
Yeah. Probably so.
This is a guy for who giving up and leaving is not an option.
Yeah. Oh, look, he talks about taking a hit in the market and like, don't worry, I'll make it back. Like he's the eternal optimist.
And he's also the kind of guy who's going to set up all night with a baseball bat waiting to bash a demon in the face.
Right, exactly. I mean, the demon that he can't see, by the way, but you live your dream. So I do like the ending. We got to talk about the ending here, and I will talk about the alternate endings in a sec, and whether or not those would have worked better. The ending of this is probably the best scene of the Katie stands and stares at the bed bit. And it just goes on and on and on. What's like 3 hours of it that's supposed to pass by that she just stands there staring at him. And I kept waiting for her to lunge at him or do something. Like when I saw this the first time, I had no idea where that was going to go.
I thought she was good. I thought she was going to strangle him or something like that. Or yeah, it was just very weird that she was just kind of standing there staring at him. But I think that was, it was an effective scene. I mean, it was very creepy, especially how they fast forward, showing the time lapse on there and just kind of how her just like slight sways almost look like she's having like a seizure or something like that, standing there. It was a very effective scene.
That's what this movie does so well. It turns nothing into something to be worried about.
Yeah.
You're watching her stand there and you're waiting for something bad to happen. And when it finally does, it's still like a really effective jump scare. And Katie Featherstone is doing great physical work.
No, I agree. And then she finally walks downstairs and we hear that blood-curdling scream that pulls him out of a dead sleep, runs downstairs, and then you hear more screams, and then he gets flung back toward the camera, and she comes walking toward it, holding the knife all bloody. That to me, I was like, that's the perfect moment of you don't show me what happened, you just show me the aftermath of it, and it totally works and freaks me out. I love that.
And the way she walks back into the room is really unsettling too. Just something about the way she's putting her feet on the floor.
It's like she's being puppeted almost, is what it looks
like.
Yes. Yeah, I got that sense of it too. I was like, she's being led.
Yeah,
it's very animalistic. It's not a natural way of how a person would walk. It's almost like an animal, just kind of like walking, and she goes up to him. It's like almost like or something.
I mean, yeah, so
make sure he is dead.
Yeah, and then that evil grin into the camera that they morph her face through or whatever. That was great. Now, did either of you see the alternate endings?
Nope, didn't even know there was alternate endings. Doesn't surprise me though.
Yeah, Ron, did you see either of them?
Yes, I've seen both of them.
Yeah, there's the one where she comes back upstairs and sits and just sort of like rocks back and forth on the floor, and you hear a friend come downstairs and scream and run away, and basically the cops come upstairs and shoot her when she comes at him with the knife. And there's that one, and then there was one more too, and I've never seen the second one. What's the other one?
It was online when the movie came out. She basically takes the knife and cuts her own throat.
Oh, wow.
Like, she comes flying in, she stomps back into the room carrying the knife, she sits down in front of the camera, and then she just cuts her throat and dies.
I see that's a real downer. I like the fact that she just disappeared and you don't know where she is. Like that to me is much more unnerving than either of the other two. I don't know why they would have gone with the other two. Is there any story as to how that happened or came about?
One of them is the original. I think the cop one is the original ending.
Yeah, the cop one. That's what I understand is like Spielberg's the one that told him to change the ending, right? Like he's the one that gave him the one that we see, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And the other one is a different ending Paramount wanted.
Well, they were real wrong on that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. So, how about that? Steven Spielberg sees your film at a festival and says, "Hey, it'd be better, guys, if Katie just, disappeared." And you go,
you could do a sequel to it then.
Yeah, which is, I mean,
no one makes just a movie. It's franchises.
Hey, the man's a businessman. All right, he understands what's going on. So I'm glad that he said that though, because he's right. That leaves the ambiguous ending. If Michael Myers is still on the ground at the original Halloween, it's satisfying, but it's much better that when Loomis looks over the ledge and he's not there, right?
Yeah, the whole movie though, the ending, I mean, it totally is the same ending as the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's the exact same ending. Guy with the camera gets attacked. You see his face. No one knows what happened to him.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Well, guys, I think we're at the point of the podcast where it's time to get final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So what are yours for Paranormal Activity? Nick?
I am going to go with medium popcorn. Thought it was an effective film. It was well made, but I do have some issues with how the plot kind of goes along and some of the, some logic errors that I think the characters were making. But overall, it's a good movie. I mean, I enjoyed it. I did watch it twice. Not going to win Father of the Year for saying this, but I did watch it with my son. And yeah, I mean, it's a movie I'm probably not going to watch again, but I am glad that I watched it. I'm glad that I watched it again. But to me, it's just kind of I'm just going to say it's just kind of a throwaway experience, but an experience though I'm glad I had.
I'm going to give it a large popcorn. It's not my favorite of the Paranormal Activity series, but it is a really good, really effective that uses found footage.
Go back to really good, really effective. Yeah.
Really good, really effective movie that uses found footage in probably the best way. There's a reason it kicked off this whole genre resurgence. There's a reason there are so many sequels. And it's really kind of unfortunate that neither of these people really does any other work, acting-wise.
Well, okay, Katie's in these. I mean, and she was on some TV show for a little while. I don't think Mika's done anything else. But. Well, I'm going to say large popcorn as well, mostly because I think like a lot of good horror movies and a lot of good first entries in a series, there's things to come back to here, and it's really all around the characters. And if it weren't for the performances you get out of Katie and Mika, I don't think it would have worked as well. So I'm going to go large popcorn. This is a fun one. I had a lot of fun with this movie, and I'm glad to revisit it. It's not one I want to watch all the time. It's definitely one of those that, every couple of 3 years, it's worth popping back in and checking on. It's not my favorite of the series either, Ron, but it is one that I do happen to really like, and I think works on a lot of levels. Now, it's got its problems. It's not perfect. I've praised this movie a lot. It's definitely got its flaws, but if you'll go with it and just get in with the characters, I think you'll enjoy the film for what it has to offer, and I think it does have a lot to offer. So I'm going to go large popcorn, and I want to ask you two one final question here as we go in with this. Did you see a franchise in this? Did you see the possibility of sequels, or are they going to stretch it out too long? What do you hope for in part 2 and beyond?
For me, I think this would work fine as a standalone movie. I mean, yeah, everything today has got to be a franchise. You got to have sequels. You got to have spin-offs. You got to have universe building. You got to have all that junk. But you can make sense. You can give it to the film. But to do this again in this type of way, I just don't see how that can work. And I haven't seen any of the sequels yet, so I don't know. Maybe it does work well, but for me, it's just, I don't know how it's going to work. I mean, is it going to be something where it's a completely different family trying to do the same thing? Is it going to be something like security footage? You know, to me, it's just, it might be just too much to see movies kind of done in this fashion again, because what works one time, I don't think it's going to work another time.
I definitely saw this becoming a franchise, if only because it costs no money and it made enough to push Saw out of Halloween.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, plus there are a
Saw
lot
kind
of
of pushed itself out though too.
Well, but to be fair though, and he's making a good point, the Saw franchise had been the most profitable horror franchise ever up to that point. I mean, those things were massive hits every time, and they ran scared.
But you look at when those came out though, that was the only thing that came out around Halloween.
Well, no, true, but they had kept the one thing the Saw films have is a pretty interesting continuity. But go ahead, Ron.
This went up against Saw and ate its lunch. Mm-hmm. Even though Saw was on its last legs, this was fresh enough and vital enough to overcome a ton of problems, but like behind the scenes development hell type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Steven Spielberg saw something in it. Who am I to say there's nothing there for a second movie if Steven Spielberg thinks it's worth it?
I will be curious.
Crystal Skull.
Well, we all have our missteps, right?
That's George Lucas.
Temple of Doom.
That is
Jurassic Park Lost World.
Those are Lucas films, and Lost World can be blamed on a lot of other things that we're not going to get into in this retrospective. But I am curious to see where they go, because Nick, I'm like splitting the middle of you two guys. I see how there could be things there, but I'm with you, Nick. When they came out with the second one, I thought, well, how are you going to sell me on found footage again? Like, how are they going to do it? And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but that conceit gets more and more interesting every time they do it. And I actually will say it's one of the more endearing parts of this.
Or something?
No, I'm not going to kill it for you. You'll just have to watch and see. But
teddy bear nanny cams, like
the second one is interesting in that it works as a prequel, during, and sequel. It's kind of all three at once.
So it is related and all.
So we will get to that next time. That's the only minor spoiler I'll give you, because I am curious to have somebody that's brand new to all of this. And Ron and I know what's coming. You have no idea. So this is going to be fun. But we'll talk about that next time on the show. Folks, as always, you can find more shows on our website. Catch up with us on Facebook and Twitter as well, and let us know what you think. We always appreciate your support and interaction. Until next time, for Nick and Ron, I'm Jay. Thanks for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.